Vantage Point, a speaker series hosted by the Worldwide College of Business. My name is Maneesh Sharma. I'm the Dean of College of Business, and I want to welcome you to this exciting conversation. And I want to introduce you to our speakers for this event. Their story is definitely fascinating, and I don't want to give too much away, but it is an incredible story of a partnership that noticed a problem that existed in the world. The solution-minded pair used innovation and initiative to solve the problem themselves rather than waiting for the market to provide a resolution. The result is a startup business with a product freshly launched to the market. I'm pleased to introduce first Mr. Terry Broussard. Welcome, Terry. Thank you for being here. Terry is a U.S. Air Force veteran and retired executive in healthcare industry, most recently having served as the Director of Product Development at Apex Innovations and now CEO at Spot2Night. Next is Sam Bruner, who's a Vice President at BlackRock. Go, Sam. A couple of $1 trillion under your belt, and co-founder of Spot2Night as well. As a certified investment management analyst, his portfolio extends across Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, and Arkansas. Prior to his appointment at BlackRock, Sam was a VP and client advisor at JP Morgan Funds. We're thrilled to have both of these gentlemen share their experiences with us tonight, as well as answer questions from faculty, students, and the Embry-Riddle community. Before turning the floor over to Terry and Sam, I want to invite our viewers to ask any questions that they have through the question and answer icon. And now I'll turn it over to Dr. Rachel Vignes, who will moderate this event. Again, Terry and Sam, welcome.
Perfect. Well, again, thank you both to Terry and Sam for joining us tonight. I know I have had the chance of speaking with both of you, and I can't tell you how excited I am to learn more about your journey, how this startup business, Spot2Night, originated. But really, before we get into the product story, I'd like to learn just a little bit more about your backgrounds and the skill set that you both bring to this business partnership. So perhaps, Terry, let's start with you. And first and foremost, thank you for your service. I think your story is probably going to resonate well with our audience and many of our students that also come from a military background, and especially those that have that entrepreneurial spirit, maybe even have a startup idea. So if you don't mind just sharing a little bit more about some of the experiences that you bring to this new business adventure.
Sure. Well, thank you. And we certainly appreciate the invite here to speak. I appreciate Matt and yourself, as well as Maneesh, for coordinating this and giving us a chance to tell our story. We're extremely excited about it. And of course, I always like a chance to share a little bit of information, a little bit about us. So I'll kind of start first, and then we're going to punt it over to Sam, and he can bring that. So as you alluded to, I grew up basically a little bit of a military family with a father that was National Guard, and moved over to Pensacola, Florida, and took a position as a flight nurse paramedic on an old Alouette helicopter. Did that for 5 years. When this young lady walked into my office, who later became my wife, she was a student, and who was a Navy brat, and my brother-in-law said, "You need to join the Air Force or something." So next thing you know, my wife and I both walked in. I'm a nurse by trade with a Bachelor's of Science in Nursing from USL here in Lafayette, Louisiana. And from there, we just took off and had a great career, was blessed with a 21-year career retiring lieutenant colonel that took me around the globe, including some, 5 years in Europe and 108 days in Kuwait and things like that, as well as the 3 years in DC, a year in the Pentagon. A lot of fun. And then I was blessed to return to Lafayette and move from the director of the ER to the vice president for nursing service, where I retired, and then got picked up to do product development with a company that was a classmate of mine who did nursing online education for critical care. So we really had a great experience there. And I'll punt it over to Sam. He can share his experience, but in all transparency, I'll tell you, Sam is actually my son-in-law. So I tried to upgrade the business brains of the family by having Sam on board, right?
Absolutely. No, it's a pleasure to be with you all, and excited to share our story and kind of the fruition of Spot tonight. But by way of introduction, thank you very much for inviting us here. And I've had an opportunity to live in a couple of different places and work for some of the largest institutions, in the world. And I think that obviously leads to kind of some application and some ability to learn and adapt. And in the heat of battle, as Terry kind of often says, kind of the fog of war, to be able to cut through, some of the minutia points and make decisive decisions for our business, certainly at the onset of where we're at. But I was originally born in Indiana, Indianapolis, grew up there, moved to Tallahassee, Florida, extended high school there, graduate of Florida State University, finance and accounting background, and actually spent a good amount of time with an internship going back up into Indianapolis, working for UBS, more focused on portfolio consultancy for some of their institutions in their institutional business. Subsequently jumped from Tallahassee to Boston, spent several years there working for Manulife as part of a roll-up. Actually started with John Hancock, subsequently turned into Manulife, working with some of their institutional clients in North Carolina and South Carolina. And then after that stint, had an opportunity to go work at JP Morgan, work my ranks up all the way from analyst to associate to vice president, and moved to Chicago, covering our clients and making frequent trips out to San Francisco, working with some of the startup companies out there, and also some of the pension funds and also smaller institutions out there within the San Francisco or Bay Area. And then had the opportunity to actually move back down south with BlackRock just about 4 years ago, and work with some of the portfolio companies down here, as some of the states that Maneesh had mentioned, working our book of business here and overseeing a team of 5 individuals all the way from analyst level to VP level, helping us to deliver ultimately the best of BlackRock. And as Terry had alluded to, I grew up, I think most importantly for this conversation, grew up as a camper. We could never afford an RV, but we did have a truck camper that we'd sleep in the back, and married into a 4-time owner of RVs, and we quickly fell in love with it and thoroughly enjoyed it. And ultimately, saw a need within this business and within this sector, and ultimately just wanted to deliver a better experience. So kind of how we fell into Spot tonight.
Absolutely. And I'm sure we're going to get to the genesis of the product idea and kind of the solution that you solved. Before we go there, though, I want to dive right into the Spot Tonight product itself, Terry. And if you could just give us and we'll backtrack. We'll come back and kind of learn more about, your experience through the new development product. But I guess before we get there, just a quick overview for our audience as to what Spot Tonight tries to accomplish. What is the business strategy? What value does it offer? And then we'll kind of backtrack into how did you get there? But again, for those not familiar, that might help give some context.
Absolutely. So the high overview is that there was not a rapid solution for finding a campground. And literally that's how Sam and I started all this, when we were looking for a campground, sitting on the side of the big bus RV with no place to go. And so it is live in the App Store. We've been there now for about 5 weeks. We give our travelers an opportunity to fill out their profile with their vehicle specific requirements. And those filters are applied to our connected members. And we use a different connection system with the different integrations. That's kind of the secret sauce. And so we present the spots that meet that traveler's requirements on the location that they're going to. Within about 8 to 10 clicks, you can book directly in the app. And that's really it, kind of at the high level. gloss over of really how it works. And it is a game changer, I'll tell you, for campground users. Of course, I'm extremely proud of it, of the work that we've done as a team here to go from the conception to live in the App Store is remarkable. It's been about an 18-month journey right now, and we've only begun.
Now, you mentioned one key word there, game changer, and I think I didn't quite understand in some of our initial conversations until I really figured out, where this idea had stemmed from, just how big of a gap there was in the market. So where did that idea or that genesis for this business concept derive from? What was the situation that you found yourself in to realize this new business idea?
Like Sam said, I'm on my fourth RV now. We've had them off and on. It's kind of a lot of people say it's kind of a military thing, right? You like to camp, you like to pack up and go places. Sometimes you get to take your family, sometimes you don't. We're literally sitting on the side of the RV on a Friday afternoon, and Sam says, "Let's go somewhere." And I said, "When?" He says, "Right now." And I said, "Here's my phone. I have 4 pages of camping apps. Find a spot in South Louisiana in the fall during camping season, and we'll go." I mean, it's loaded, it's fueled, it's ready to go. And that's when we realized, indeed we had a problem, and I guess you could call that the aha moment. So we went through some different technology parts, and I'll just touch on this first, and then I'm going to flip over to Sam. But some of the first ideas we had were really capital intense and very more hardware structured. And I literally was talking to every campground that I could come to and really get spun up on the technology that they were using, their reservation systems. And so from there, we realized that wasn't really going to be the solution. And at that point, we got into more of a development phase. And Sam had some contacts. I'll punt over to Sam, and he'll kind of step us through that part.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe just to emphasize what Terry had said too, I mean, it was kind of shocking, to be honest with you, that it hadn't been created yet. I mean, we understood it wasn't that easy, to just go RVing and find a spot that met your criteria, but we also didn't think it was that hard. And as Terry alluded to, right, we spent several hours flipping through the 4 pages of applications that we had all, used. And really what it led you to is a horrible user experience and traveler experience, and a really bad experience for, I would say in most instances, the campgrounds, as well as reaching those individual consumers and those travelers that want to stay in their park. And there are really 2 bad options. One being a campground website that ultimately, at best, I kind of jokingly say was updated around 1992. And then you've got the apps that have every single campground within the United States. But the second you select the campground that you want to stay in, it pushes you back out to that 1992 website, right? And it was so fragmented from our perspective that there needed to be a much better, solution to deliver that. And as Terry alluded to, we spent several months trying to come up what would be an appropriate business model for Spot Tonight, and at varying capital levels. But we did know at the fruition we wanted to be able to see real-time availability of spots within campgrounds across the United States. And obviously there are varying degrees of how we could do that. And as Terry alluded to, there was more capital intensive of actual hardware in the parks. And then we quickly realized from a scaling ability that there was no way we were going to be able to cover the broader North America with all of the parks that are out there. We'll say roughly 7,000 private campgrounds. And if you Google today, it continues to increase, but they'll say something around 16 to 17,000 campgrounds across the United States. And, we learned very quickly that there needed to be a technology base of Spot Tonight, ultimately a technology that would allow us to scale and grow very rapidly in a capital light form that allowed, an opportunity to create a marketplace, both from a campground perspective, but also an RV traveler perspective.
So can I jump in real quick before we get to that product design process and some of those decisions that were made early on, just to kind of draw a parallel to perhaps another tourism or travel industry, are we saying something along the lines of you as a RV vacationer would contact these individual locations, perhaps one by one? There is no, for example, in the hotel and hospitality industry, say the resource such as say, Travelocity or hotels.com specific and unique to the RV market. Did I capture that right? And that's really the problem that it sounds like you identified in terms of you needed to find a solution that would allow you an ability to see down the road what different accommodations were in fact available. Did I get that right?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I kind of have a basic premise in kind of in relation to my hospital situation and experience where placing patients in beds is extremely troublesome, right? In other words, I know that there's empty beds out there. We just had to find the systems to find them, and we solved that in the past. So I knew that this could be applied here. And I failed to mention that my master's is in public administration with a concentration in information systems. But more importantly, I'm an amateur radio operator. So I'm all about beacons and technology and hardware. That's my passion. And I literally have a suitcase back here that was my first beta test that involved sensor technology, but it was too capital intensive and it was just not practical. I mean, there's 6,500 private parks out there. So we had to come up with a better way to even if there was one spot empty and you're driving down I-75 and you're looking, it's late night and you can go an hour, that you can just hand the device over to your navigator and say, all of my preferences are loaded. I can go an hour, search and find a spot. And Spot Tonight does that.
Absolutely fantastic. Like, to know that problem was there and a solution now brought to market is nothing short of amazing. So help us to understand it. Obviously you didn't get from this problem to now what you have is a live app on the market. What were some of those initial conversations or design processes that were undertaken to kind of get this idea spun up and get some, I think, Sam, you touched on it to some extent, some of those initial planning, would this work? Would this not work? And that sort of thing. Just kind of curious, those initial stages, what did they look like for you?
I think more than anything, and Terry mentioned this as well, is we were able to build a really strong team. The two, us two on the call, there's 6 other that have supported us in different, facets of the business and delivering on their skill set. But at the early onset of what the product design looked like, we had both been had utilized many different applications. I think that was the I would say most challenging part at the early product design stage is because you're competing against Apple, you're competing against Google, you're competing against Uber, and delivering a seamless product that folks just expect it to instantly work, right? And before we even got to that product design perspective, we had to broaden the subset of folks that we had spoken about this with. I mean, we initially obviously pulled in our I would say close knit of beta users, of folks that we kind of coined a safe space to share this idea. And ultimately, if it would be effective, we then went into a customer discovery process that was extensive. We pulled in a couple of resources that I had worked with in several other projects to help us broaden really the input of what people were willing to utilize and ultimately wanted to utilize. We wanted to make sure it just wasn't Terry and I that wanted to ultimately have utilization of an application like this, right? And you alluded to it, Rachel, earlier. I mean, we didn't necessarily have to reinvent the business model. It is an Expedia, a Booking.com business model. However, there were a couple of different things, and we can touch on this in a moment, that ultimately we had to position our business model a little bit different than what previously has been done, because it certainly had been tried before. And so we had to reinvent a little bit, take some of those learnings and implement it in what the current Spot Tonight business model would be. However, I think at the onset of that product design, the bar was set extraordinarily high, because, as I had mentioned, you're competing versus some of the largest companies in the world, for that matter, and you have to deliver a really clean UI UX experience, while still understanding what your ultimate goal was. And our ultimate goal was to deliver a tool to campers by just a few clicks of the button, in a seamless process, so they could see ultimately what was available, and then have an enjoyable experience in doing so.
And I would just add to Sam's comment on the first part, that about the traveler. But our second customer column is that park owner, and we did not want to put any burden on the park owner. There are other systems that basically are not connected, that require the park owner to monitor their phone and run back to the office and text and see if they've got a spot and then confirm. Meanwhile, the traveler's moving at 70 miles an hour down the destination pathway without any real-time visibility. So we really wanted to coin that Air Force term, a fire and forget type system, right? We wanted to be able to connect, load, and it be seamless integration, such to the point that if a tree takes down spots 1, 2, and 3, and they take it off in their system, it's off in our system. If a traveler, and these are real world scenarios, if a traveler walks up on checkout and says, bye, thank you very much. By the way, spot 27 just arced on the 50 amp and I think I burned my plug, and they close it in their system, it's closed in our system. So it's fire and forget, real-time visibility, and that was the design goal as well. Easy for the camper and equally as easy for the park owner.
Wonderful. Now we're getting some questions in the chat that are more so post-design and app related. So we'll get to those in a minute. But there was one question that touched more so on the earlier stages of the product development process, specific to some of the data or research that might have been used. And the question goes like this. Did you use any specific research methods to gather the data before starting the process? So where did some of this, Sam, you mentioned it, you didn't want it just to be a Terry and Sam idea, it needed to be grounded. What were some of those resources that you relied upon?
We actually pulled in a consultant that I worked with, because I knew that this wasn't a subset. And it kind of goes back to my earlier comment. Not everyone is a Swiss Army knife, right? And this was an area that I knew in previous projects that I'd worked on that we needed someone of expertise. So we actually pulled in a consultant that we had vetted several different times and had worked on some pretty large products, or I should say projects, Navy, Krispy Kreme, different launches at varying levels of consumer-oriented solutions. And so through that customer discovery process, we actually polled nationwide. There was roughly about 500 in a controlled group, and we expanded that population as well with a closer group of several hundred within Facebook to help us arrive at ultimately what that product design would be. We ran through several iterations in terms of actual reviews of what needed to be implemented within the application process. But it was a subset of individuals that we knew, broadly speaking, that we wanted to get outside of our network of travelers that said, hey, it's a great idea. But ultimately, we needed to expand that nationwide to folks at varying levels and really develop, I would say, more than anything, a customer profile. And that's where we ended up. When we looked at the travelers that we were going to be engaging at, mostly affluent, educated, making north of $50,000, and have backgrounds within healthcare, technology, education. And so we knew kind of expectations of each one of those individuals of saying, okay, yes, this is a viable business model because we are going after a consumer that does have an ability for disposable income, and understanding that RVing is not an inexpensive hobby. And so there are expectations that come along with that. in what that product design looked like, from a UX perspective.
I'm glad you mentioned that because that was actually one of the questions both that came up earlier, but then also kind of in my thought process, having worked with the customer and trying to understand use and how they would navigate through this system. I'm assuming some of that initial conversation research was done, well before the app was developed. Tell us a little bit more about that UX design process and how it was tested once the app started to become a formation and perhaps even some of the beta testing that was done on the app before the go live.
I'll tell you, let's put a time hack on, because really, like I said, we started 18 months ago, pre-COVID, and the traveling population has significantly grown right now. All of the industry metrics will tell you that it's off the chart as far as sales. And when it was hard to get a spot 16, 18 months ago, it's exponentially harder now. And so, as Sam alluded to, the research led us to the first design. And I had I'm the traveler by heart. So I had a really good network of RVers by class. I knew what type my friends had in different Facebook groups. Sam had a great network of people that were into that experience and in a different age, right? Boomer and millennial. So it really helped, because what we didn't talk about was that shift in demographics from the older retired population to now the some 1.25 million full-time RVers that are in the younger subset that are working full-time out of their RV. So to that point, then we started with a beta set, and we did a pre-launch in the Apple Test Flight store in the fall, and people had it to play with it and break it. And we went through several different design iterations to where we're at now in the store, which is 1.0.7. And Sam might have some more to add in there. Yeah.
Yeah, and what I would add to that is really kind of we tried to work backwards with our team, meaning what are we looking to deliver? We're able and want to deliver a booking sequence within 4 to 6 clicks. And why was that the expectation? Because that's the exact same that you can go and everyone can download Hotels Tonight or Expedia, and you got 4 to 6 clicks, you have your vacation booked. And so those were the expectations as to what that user experience was going to be from start to finish. And I would say drawing it back to the demographic of our, I would say our population, and obviously that's dynamically changing and has changed over the past 12 months with just the ability for folks to work remote. But we also approached it from one, we have to create raving fans within the early users of Spot Tonight. And to do so, you had to create a wow experience. And, I would say, to be completely transparent, I think in our first iterations, we built the product too far along, opposed to helping a better UX experience or a guide path of showing folks what the wow experience would be. Because I would say also our largest demographic is going to be between 55 and 65 of who's going to be utilizing the app. And in most instances, you have one shot at making it work. And if it does not, you have to, it's a long path to regain that customer because of that, I would say, lackluster initial user experience. And so we had, I would say, probably 10 different iterations of what the user glide path would be, wireframed out, different click-throughs, but really took a lot of inspiration. It didn't look too far from the Uber application, right? It finds your location, you select when you need it, what type of car you need, and you hit find me a driver, right? And it ultimately delivers that. And it goes back to those are the expectations, irregardless if you've got $1 billion budget or several $100,000 budget on building the product out. But it was an exhaustive process. And I would say we have a phenomenal member of our team, Mike Perrone. He's the chief product officer for us. He's had several roles, design director for Oprah.com. And he's worked at varying firms. But ultimately does a wonderful job of taking what we're able to lay out for him and ultimately deliver that 4 to 6 clicks of ultimately from discovery to purchase within, I would say 30 seconds in some instances. So that was one of the, I would say, looking at our the previous applications that are still out there, and I would say in some instances competitors or the directories that are out there, is that there in some instances there's too much information. It's information overload, and that was part of the feedback that we had received in those earlier customer discoveries. Is don't stray too far away from what your core mission is, and your core mission is ultimately to show real-time availability and allow folks to take a trip there. So it was an exhaustive process, but we also had a tremendous amount of additional eyes on it as well.
Yes, absolutely. And so I could tell you, I downloaded the app, and from first blush, I can tell you I was impressed. But we're going to get to that, that launch and kind of some of the post reviews. I want to touch on that in just a minute. But let's go back and talk a little bit about the actual data that is feeding your system. So, and actually there's a couple of questions that we're touching on this in the Q&A in any case. So I think now is a great time to talk about where does this information come from? Specifically, a question here is, how does the system connect to these parks? How does it get that information in real time? And here's an interesting one that kind of ties into perhaps some challenges that you might have faced in that I can imagine a lot of parks and recreation campground sites are still very antiquated in their registration process. So tell us a little bit more about the data inputs and where that, how that integration happens behind the scenes.
Sure. We actually we started with our market research and discovered, as I said, before talking to campground owners, there's some 50 or more plus reservation systems. There's not a Sabreliner like for the airlines when Sabre first came out. That is not there in the RV world. So then we used some more research that said, these are some of the top 3. And oh, by the way, this first one actually has an API developer kit that you can purchase. And so we programmed to that. Our coders write to the API level. And so we're talking direct to the data set that the parks are talking to. I talk to the park owners. That's my spin on this side. And I tell them basically, we are a subordinate booking terminal to their system. We have no higher authority than they give us, right? We can't reach into secret hole and pull reservations or anything. We're looking like a third terminal in their office. And so that's how it is. So there's no update that has to be done by the park other than what they would normally do in their system. And that's why when you go into the app, you'll see a timer clicking down because you're actually looking at a live booking that somebody could jump in there ahead of you on another traveler and snag the booking if you're not quick. So that's why it's important. I tell people to download the app and build your favorite park list because that's available in the app. And you can have all of those ready to go so that you pretty much know it. And we have sharing features and some standard features that let travelers who go together, which interesting was another one of our research market dynamics, that we as a family all go together. And that was a common feature. So that's our hashtag, go together. And so we actually have that button, you can share those spots. So that data integration occurs at the API level, coded. So there's no manual inputs. No one's feeding a spot tonight vacancy list at night before they close the campground up.
One thing I would add to that is it was very strategic, and when we started to evaluate, because there's over 50 plus park management systems, and it was, I would say, I know we'll probably talk about challenges later on, but it was a challenge working with some of the park management systems because they are old legacy technologies for hotel rooms. And the best analogy I can use is, for most of us, when we book a hotel room, you just don't want to be on the first floor, and you want a king bed, and if you got a great room, great. But within the campground, there are 5 to 6 different variables that have to meet your core criteria for even to be able to select that spot, right? And so that integration between park management systems actually allows this to take place, where in most instances we've actually had to build alongside these park management systems to deliver exactly the characteristics that we need to deliver a uniformed experience, right? And how the marketplace right now, and it's been kind of an interesting kind of feedback loop, if you will, over the past month, is most folks just expect the inventory to be on there. They don't understand specifically what it takes to get the inventory there and the real-time booking, because each one of the park management systems in previous business models, you're only able to book with that particular park management system. And so when our kind of aggregation business model started, right, people don't necessarily say, hey, I want to stay with an RMS park. I doubt anybody on this call or any RVer actually knows RMS, but they're one of the leading providers of campground technology in North America. And so ultimately, it's been an interesting experience because on our platform, although it's not forward facing and you don't see it, we're actually pulling from multiple platforms that we strategically, went after, if you will, and sought partnerships, and those being RMS, Checkfront, and NewBook for varying degrees. When we went through the process of reviewing their APIs, whether it be OTA, REST API, whether it's a culmination of the two, whether they're pushing or pulling data to us, and what's the easiest way ultimately to deliver that 4 clicks for a consumer, for a traveler to do it. So there's a lot of underlying structure to Spot Tonight that a whole lot of people you don't necessarily see just yet, but ultimately it was a process of selecting, really, I would say, just developing our team across the board of selecting each one of those park management systems so we could look forward after we're done with the first 3, we can move on to the next 10 and ultimately say, okay, we've had an understanding of what each one of these APIs look like, and have the ability to kind of adapt, because we know that there hasn't been a system that's integrated like we have with these park management systems before, which is also going back to kind of customer discovery and what allowed us to continue to push on. I mean, it's validation at each one of those points that we continue to ask for credentials and inputs that are necessary for our experience that hasn't been done before.
What Sam didn't fail to mention was the term Switzerland, because that's our coin, really, and Sam coined that term, that we really have to present as neutral party, because these are competitors, right? And so we are extremely respectful of that neutrality and protect trade secrets amongst all of these different competitors, because we want to continue our success for integrations as we grow into future integrations. And it's all about being that trusted business partner in those discussions.
Yeah, so it almost appears as though you are serving as that middle man, or the middle vendor, partner is a better word probably, between those parks that have the reservation systems and the user who wants the aggregate of what's available in the market. Love it. And again, it's almost one of those aha moments, like, why hasn't this been thought of earlier? But I love that you guys recognize this and was able to develop a product that could fit that solution. Let's talk and move into the actual launch, and as we get some time to devote to what does it look like now that this product has been taken to market. First, tell us a little bit more about your experience having worked with the Apple App Store, and it's our understanding that there's development in place for the Android version to go in the App Store there. So any lessons learned, any best practices, any challenges? You mentioned the word, Sam. Any challenges that you came across in the actual bringing this product to market?
Absolutely, there's a challenge.
But every day we get better.
But we tackle them and push through. But I would say, as it relates to getting product to the Apple Store, really, you got to pick left or right. And so we picked Apple development first from an Android, and I should say chose to postpone the Android and focus more on the Apple product. I think we've been met with criticism on both sides of why'd you go Apple or Android first. Most people can Google and say, well, there's more Androids in the world. You should have gone with that first, or what was the subset that drove you toward Apple? Our decision point was that Apple is more challenging to build that product from an iOS perspective versus an Android perspective for our team, right? I won't speak for obviously everybody. Everyone has different proficiency levels, but for our team, it made sense to go iOS first. And we kind of used, I would say, agile to lay out obviously our sprints, and we kind of talk about them in 90-day sprints. But as it relates to the App Store, we're on 2-week sequences, and we tend to find that sequence of development allows us enough time to include features that we've taken from consumers, from travelers, and ultimately just delivering a better experience. But those 2-week sprints, I think, has allowed us to get in, when we're kind of talking about tactics or strategies as it relates to the launch, we were doing those 2-week sprints in test flight, which is kind of a secondary app development where you can have certain folks have access to your application. And so through that process, though, of submitting in test flight, you're actually getting also a pseudo approval from Apple on your product. And so keeping with that sequence, it allows us to keep a really fresh trail of those reviews and what's systematically changing in the process there, which I think ultimately has allowed us to appease Apple. In most instances, we've had several reviews where we've had to actually type in rebuttals on why we need certain information, just around consumer protection and data protection. And so, obviously that's at the forefront of not only Apple's system, but our system as well, and making sure that, we're taking that into consideration when building a product, and taking into consideration, making sure that the information that we are collecting is ultimately useful, and in turn building a better experience for our users and campgrounds for that matter, the two-sided marketplace.
Yeah, I think they have the App Store. It's my first experience dealing with the App Store. They have some pretty rigid guardrails, right? So we got asked a lot of questions about, like Sam said, about the user demographics. Well, it's very hard to place a camper into a senior community that's restricted to 55 and up if you don't have the age of the traveler. So that was an easy clarification for them. That was one of the typical of a question that they would ask. So, they're not all campers. So we have to be able to explain that into them. If the traveler's 55 or older, they can see that park in their search results. And so that was probably one of the best examples.
And I would say, Rachel, to kind of answer your secondary question around the new product launch, what were some of the strategies that we employed. We were actually very advantageous and fortuitous, really. We were picked up early by some of the social media outlets. A couple of articles actually ran with us. And so we actually adapted because we just had a landing page for a website. It kind of outlined exactly what we were doing, but ultimately we did flip that because we increased our user traffic and visitor traffic on our website to actually start pre-registrations, which started to capture really our initial customer subset that has been so critical for us in the early months here of launch. And through that organic traffic, we accumulated about 6,000 pre-registered folks that I would believe in most instances about 98% of which are RVers. And so that was really kind of the start of what our product launch would look like, because that allowed us to lay out the strategy ultimately of how we were going to roll out the product to those initial 6,000 folks that heard of the idea and ultimately are ambassadors of our idea, right? And I think that's really, I would say, the critical point for us in terms of the new product launches is to build that ambassador for us, because we understand over the next several months, it's not going to necessarily be the experience immediately, but over the next 6 months, it will be. And so building that wow experience with those early adopters of our application and ultimately the service allowed us to deliver on the strategies of what we laid out. Now, specific to the strategies, though, we do focus heavily on digital marketing. Our name, I'd say main channel of such is Facebook. We do have a team as well, a digital marketing team that we deploy there, building out customer profiles, retargeting. And that's been a learning process, I think, for everybody, is how quickly and dynamically it has shifted. But the continuity within that Facebook channel, as Terry and I have experienced, I mean, the RV community is incredibly lively. The first thing you do is when you're going on a trip, you say you're going on a trip, you document your path, the stops that you're at, and then you get to the campground, you take a picture with your friends and family. And ultimately all of that data, as we all know, is on Facebook, and it allows us to really hone in on specifically who our demographic would be. And that allows us to really come up with, okay, on a weekly basis, what are some of the KPIs? What are some of the key results that we're looking for that kind of drive us down in what that new product launch would look like? And I would say it continues. We're still in the product launch phase. I would say we really about a month ago put it in the App Store. So it's really still coming to fruition as we speak today.
You couldn't be more correct, and you are starting to talk my language when you start to mention all these different marketing terms and the customer experience and the customer journey. I love that. That could be a whole nother conversation for another day. I don't know that we have enough to get into the whole marketing strategy in the next 10 or so minutes that we have here together. With that said, you did mention the business model and the strategy. So let's focus there for one moment. What does success look like in terms of some of those key performance indicators that you might be measuring? And then maybe from if you don't mind sharing to what extent, again, I'll leave it to your purview, but tell us a little bit more about the resources used to start the organization. Was it external funded? And where do we see this moving towards in terms of a revenue generating system? Some strategy there, if you don't mind.
I think before we jump into the KPIs, I think what's most important in folks, and KPIs are obviously critical, but I think what's most important is the objective of what we're trying to achieve, and then back into the key results that we need to achieve to then subsequently get to the key performance indicators that everybody wants to see from a business vantage point. And so, and I would say keeping it at a very high level, as an example, I think most folks on this call would say, well, they want as many reservations as they want, right? Well, that is our objective, right? To continually increase reservations on the broader Spot Tonight platform. Now, how do we back into, okay, that increased reservation bucket? Well, it's okay. We need to target individual RV travelers, put a unit number for that. We'll say 50,000 within the first quarter. And then ultimately, how do we continue to increase those reservations? It backs into what is that user experience, learning from those users that are in the application. Where are they going? Where are they stopping? Why are they stopping? And ultimately making sure that each one of those new users at least has a reservation within the first 30 days. And we kind of pick that 30-day marker as saying, because it is a new product, you do have an opportunity to search across the United States at the connected parks and allow a little bit of planning. And if we're able to capitalize on at least 50% of those new users actually utilizing the tool, then we think that we are in essence creating raving fans. Now, just as that example, increasing reservations, right? There's 3 different levels that went into what that overall looks like. And then it backs into what our day-to-day is. Ultimately, our business model right now is built on a convenience fee. And I think this is critical when we go back to kind of that wow moment that you expressed, Rachel, of why hasn't this been done before? I think on two fronts. One, we talked a little bit about the technologies from a park management perspective. They just haven't been there. And ultimately, the best way for an individual to have real-time booking is to stick within their single silo, i.e., say, an RMS or a check front or a new book or a camp spot, to where it just shows their direct inventory that is utilizing their campground. And so that specifically was one of the first kind of challenges of how do we going to develop this business model, and ultimately why we don't want to charge individual campgrounds. And so just a quick little snippet on my background. My family owned a bed and breakfast, and we could never put our rooms on a booking.com or TripAdvisor or Expedia because they would take 15 to 30% off the nightly booking rate. And margins just don't support that in some of the small businesses from an inventory perspective. And that same exact principle applies to campgrounds. So we don't charge a single cent to the campgrounds, and obviously that has led us to adoption within the campground space, because ultimately we are providing a marketplace and we are providing customers. But that being said, it's also been a dynamic shift of what users are, and I'm just meaning users as in just people in general, are starting to be accustomed to convenience fees. And so backing into that, ultimately that is where our business model has to continue to increase to support the business. But then I would say, and Terry would mention this as well, we do anticipate actually being able to eliminate the convenience fee when we do hit a critical point within our business to help create a little bit of a moat around what we've created. But if I were to lay out specific KPIs for us, one is obviously reservations, and we break that into 3 different buckets. We do average night, we do the average booking rate, and we do the average spot to night fee, which is anywhere between $5 and $12. The second is going to be active parks within spot to night, because we do have to aggregate those, and we aggregate those via large park groups or small REIT companies, but also individual campgrounds that are just one campground owner to one campground. But active parks is at 42 parks a month. And we believe that that will get us to what we believe is our kind of critical mass before the summer season, about 500 parks. And then third, which we kind of look at as how are we capturing our raving fans? It's really our Spot On Ambassador program. And ultimately that rewards a member of our family of travelers a free evening at a given park. So we actually give a $50 credit to that individual for a connected park that our team is able to put within Spot Tonight. And so I would mention that everyone's KPIs are slightly different and slightly different as you continue to progress throughout the business model. Our KPIs today will be very different than they are right now, 90 days from now. But we do put those in place because it allows us to kind of back into what's our core objective and how do we take those in bite-sized chunks to execute as a team effectively on those. I know, Rachel, you had one other question around funding and how the fruition of the business started. And so it's actually capital from Terry and I were the initial investments. And we actually had, we've raised 2 rounds. We've raised 2 seed rounds. So the first round, we set a target of $350,000, and we felt that that would get us to a minimum viable product to ultimately go out and showcase and show customer fit and market fit. And we actually exceeded that goal. We raised about $510,000. So we got a little bit of a cushion, and then decided to raise our second seed because we felt we were a bit early in the Series A conversation, if you will. And so we raised the second seed that will be closing here actually within several days of $1 million for us to continue to operate moving forward and ultimately just building out our team. So we have the structure in place to handle some of those KPIs that we just mentioned, because there's obviously a lot of additional layers that go into each one of those from a management perspective and a business management perspective. But it was, I kind of say, quasi bootstrapped, right? It's our friends and families that wanted to kind of take this crazy journey with us and saw ultimately the passion that we both had to solve this problem. And we were able to articulate that, pretty well. And, at this point now we're starting to have serious conversations around entering the everyone kind of calls it the venture capital world, and ultimately showing some of those KPIs that are most important to have that raise that we know we will need going into really 2022 more than anything. So those conversations are starting now.
Fantastic. There's one question, and it somewhat is related to the conversation of the exchange that you have with customers, the security of that information. I overlooked this question, but how early in the conversation was security implemented during that planning, the agile process? Was that at what stage did that conversation start to begin?
I will tell you from the get-go, from very early, obviously, the Apple development process maintains, as I spoke earlier, about the guardrails that they protect your information. I literally, as I said, we had to justify every bit of information that we asked the user to input. And we did have some feedback initially early on, as Sam said, that we kind of put the first version was too far out of the gate, right? We wanted to know everything up front. So we changed that. So now, so the booking, you don't really have to give that information until you really want to match those filters with the RV that you're looking for. So we're not capturing that data. We are giving people an upfront chance to look at campgrounds and see that before they have to input anything about them. And so I think with regard, a lot of kudos to the Apple team there for doing that. And the questions to us, once you develop in their basic guardrails, were pretty simple and easy to justify as far as why we needed to know that. It was pretty logical. I think they had the aha moment right there. The finance side, we're an integrated partner with Stripe, so we don't store credit card information or anything like that. We pass tokens to the integrations, and the APIs. We're accustomed to that. Our coding shows as a paid account, and it's very clear, a very clear pathway for the parks. They have a tab that they can see the exchange of
Fantastic. Yes. And so, as I mentioned, kind of midway through this whole conversation, I said I had signed up for Spot tonight just to get a sense of what it looked like. And before I turn the floor back over to Dean Sharma, I have to just close by saying this. When we designed this speaker series, we wanted to do it not just to inform those that are watching, both here live and then in our recording, but also to inspire. And I'll tell you, I, for one, am inspired by your entrepreneurial journey. Just the ability to, like you said, identify a problem, find a solution, and bring it to market. I am excited to follow your journey. So again, thank you for your time tonight. I'll turn it over to the Dean for his closing thoughts.
Wow, what a wonderful conversation, Terry and Sam. Thank you both for being with us this evening and taking the time. Some tough questions, great answers. I hope we can stay connected even after this conversation is done. Your journey in launching Spot tonight, fascinating, like Rachel said, inspiring to all of us. And I hope it inspires listeners and our students who can watch it later to say that when you see a problem, you can actually, instead of either observing it or either just lamenting the problem, actually go ahead and find a solution for it. So you guys have done that. Fantastic story. So thank you both for being with us this evening and giving us so much of your time. Really appreciate it. To rest everybody in the audience as we close out this edition of the Vantage Point, we encourage everybody to kind of stay connected with us, and you can watch us on our YouTube channel for the recordings of the past event. And we hope to see you again in the future to the next Vantage Point series. So Terry, Sam, thank you so much. It was inspirational, and we'll be in touch again. So have a great evening. And
thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.